the change you want to see in the world. That's one of my favorite quotes from Gandhi. We too often look to others to make our world better. Some people have expectations of change in their lives and communities, even though they never take the time to vote for who's in office. The obvious flaw is in this thinking is that if you don't participate and let your voice be heard, even people of goodwill don't know your desires or interests. Too often, you have folks that are after the fact complainers, even though they did not do anything to fulfill even the most important civic right of voting. If you do nothing to impact who gets into office, but you're in the front of the line for grievances about what we believe is wrong with our society, then the problem starts with you. So I ask all of our listeners to listen intently to this podcast and share it with others to make sure all of our voices are heard, first and foremost through our vote. That's how change is made. Welcome to Can We Talk 360. I'm excited to have a discussion on the topic of what you need to know to vote in Florida in 2024. And our guest is Supervisor of Elections Joe Scott of Broward County. He's a West Point graduate with an MBA from Villanova, who also won the Bronze Star as a Army captain. He was also with us first back in 2020. And Joe, thank you so much for coming back to have a conversation on this important topic.
My pleasure, Gene. Thanks for having me.
We're coming into a presidential election this year. How many months? Six months from now. The time is moving fast. And I want to make sure that all of our listeners and their friends and family members are prepared to participate in this important civic responsibility and duty of voting. One of the questions that I want to discuss with you, Joe, is have there been changes, if you will, to the voting laws which are going to impact voting this year versus the way it was in the general election 4 years ago?
Have there? Yeah, so actually it has been a very active few years since the last presidential election. I'm sure your listeners will remember that after the last presidential election, there was quite a bit of hoopla over the outcome of that election. And since then, especially here in the state of Florida, our legislators really went to work and they passed 3 major bills that made dramatic changes to how we conduct elections here in the state of Florida. So yes, there's been some major changes, and I'll take some time to kind of walk through some of the things that people need to know for this upcoming election.
Let's take them one at a time, because and you're obviously adapting and speaking to our citizens here in Broward County, our residents in Broward County. Let's go one at a time so they'll understand each of the major changes that have occurred and know how it's going to impact them in exercising their right to vote.
Sure. Yeah. So the first, one of the biggest things that happened right off the bat, which one of the things that I supported, is a lot of the stuff that they did, I was really against, and I was out there, trying to fight back and stop some of these things from happening. But the one thing that I thought was pretty positive was that there was an improvement in some of our security procedures around how we do vote by mail, which I felt like was necessary. And if they had just kind of left it there, which sort of trying to enhance the security, make it safer, making sure that we protect the integrity of elections, that would have been good. Some of the stuff they did, though, kind of went beyond that and went into sort of the realm of I would say voter suppression. But to talk about the security measures now, when you go to request a vote by mail ballot, you actually have to give us an identifier, which is either your driver's license number, which is that's what it is for the vast majority of folks, because most people register to vote at the DMV, and we have their driver's license number on file. But for some people, it's the last 4 of their social security number. And it's whichever number we have on file for you. So when you go to request your vote by mail ballot, you're going to be required to provide that so that we use that to verify your identity so that we know that you are the correct person who's requesting the vote by mail ballot, so that we can make sure we have the proper mailing address to send it to, because vote by mail ballots cannot be forwarded. So, we have to make sure we have the right address on file. So to make sure that we have everything right and that we're talking to the right person, we have to do those identifiers. That's one of the big changes that just happened.
And so when the person calls or goes online, because you can do it online by yourself without speaking to a human being, right?
That's correct, yes.
And whether you're online or in person, you need the ID. The ID can be your last 4 digits of your social security number, or you can plug in your driver's license to verify who you are.
Correct.
So they need to have that information readily available. You can't show up at the place, whether it's your main office or any of the satellites that you have, without some identification asking for a ballot. That is no longer possible, and you can't gather ballots for other people, saying you're going to deliver them to other people. Those people have to go through the process individually.
Yeah, that's correct. There's some limited ability for you to take care of your family members, or if there's somebody who has, a disabled person that you might be caring for. So there are exceptions where you can pick up a ballot for another person, but there's very specific examples, and you have to, declare your relationship to the person that you are, getting a ballot for.
And do you have to bring that person's information? If you have a disabled person, do you need that person's social security or other identifiable information?
You do, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that covers the person which you were pleased with, that improved the security of how vote by mail was going to be utilized this year and henceforth until the law changes again.
Right. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. And so part of it, and then I think part of it, they did kind of make it a little bit more difficult in some cases of making these specific relationships. I think in some cases it might be a little difficult for people to, I think in some cases, some of the rules that they made could be a little bit intimidating for certain people in certain communities, of being nervous about whether or not they meet the specific requirements. So there's the part about actually requesting your ballot. There's the part about returning your ballot, the fact that you can only have your ballot, somebody in your immediate family, and all those relationships are defined in the law, and then plus an additional two, right? One thing I
What do
think
you mean by that last thing, Joe? Plus an additional two.
So basically, it's not as if when you go to bring back your ballots and you go to drop them off, there's not a set number that you can drop off, because you can bring back your ballot, anybody who's the immediate family member, and you can bring two more.
I got you.
Right.
Okay.
So the law actually gets really detailed into which relationships. And I think where we kind of get is that a lot of folks aren't going to know some of the nitty-gritty that's in the law. And where I think that you end up having a disproportionate impact is the fact that certain communities really aren't worried about it. They're not concerned that they're going to be targeted as saying that you guys are committing voter fraud. But there's other communities that are going to be very, very concerned about it. And they're going to probably be overly safe, and probably say, well, I can't take anybody's ballot back but my own, because I'm not 100% sure, because I don't know exactly how this law works. And that leads to, it's to me, it's sort of a form of voter suppression, where
Absolutely.
certain communities are over policed, and the over policed communities are going to be far more cautious in how they act, as opposed to other communities that don't get over policed and really just are not concerned. They may not even be aware that the law has changed.
Right.
There's certain things that have happened and continue to happen and will continue to happen. Say, for example, churches collecting for their parishioners, where you'll go in on Sunday and there'll be a basket where you drop off all your vote by mail ballots, and then somebody from the church takes all the vote by mail ballots to the SOE office. I can promise you there are parts of Florida, some of the rural areas, where these types of practices will continue, and they've been doing it forever, and they have no idea that the law even changed. But you take a big urban county like Broward, where these types of things also happened, it's going to stop. It's not going to happen here,
Right.
because we're one of those areas that gets over policed. So
Exactly.
it's going to be a huge advantage for certain parts of the state, particularly rural areas,
Mhm.
are going to end up having that huge advantage of just having a lot more assistance with helping their people vote.
And it takes me back in this discussion of last general election when we had the integrity police or whatever our governor called it, and you just
Yeah,
look at who was harassed and arrested, and their doors knocked down in the middle of the night were people of color.
yeah,
Vast majority of it. And it turned out not to be more than 30, 50 people, if that many. But it's the intimidation factor
exactly.
that was at play more than the numbers. And many of those cases got thrown out by the courts.
It did.
Uh,
Yeah, exactly. That's
it
exactly
just
right.
got thrown out. But it's efforts, as you say, that suppress, intimidate people to get them off. One of the areas I remember being involved in that, before we go on to the next major change in the law, were people that are felons that had been given from officials in the
Mhm.
process saying you can vote. And they go vote, and then they're told, no, you couldn't vote, and you're now arrested because you shouldn't have voted. Uh, how do we give guidance to former felons who've come out, they've done their time, and they're interested in getting reactivated, if you would, in the process of voting?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because what I've found now, and you're absolutely right, is that there is this huge intimidation factor, and people are scared and they're nervous about registering to vote and participating. And one individual I spoke to was arrested for a drunken disorderly and spent a night in jail back in the 90s, and told me they don't want to fool with it because they're not sure. And I said, well, that really doesn't sound like a felony to me. I'm pretty sure you didn't lose your right to vote over that, but they don't want to take any chances. Um, so that's heartbreaking because the reality is that a lot of people fought hard to get this constitutional amendment passed in 2018 that basically says that once you have completed all the terms of your sentence, with the small exception of let's say small in numbers, it's a big deal, but it's a small in numbers exception of people who were convicted of murder or people who were convicted of a sexual offense. So, take those people out. I'm not talking to them. If you fall into those categories, you have to go to the clemency board before you would get your right to vote restored. For everybody else who was convicted of a felony in their life, once you have completed all the terms of your sentence, you finished your incarceration if you had any, you're off of probation, your fines and fees are paid. Everything that was part of that sentence has been completed. Again, you're not somebody who was convicted of murder or sexual assault. You've completed all the terms of your sentence. You don't need any kind of permission from the government. Your right to vote is automatically restored by that constitutional amendment. So the Constitution of the state of Florida now says that your right to vote is restored as soon as you've completed all the terms of your sentence. And people should understand that that's your right, and you should exercise that right, and you should participate. Now, another important thing for people to know is that if you're not sure about your status, filling out a voter registration application is not the way to test that. When you fill out that voter registration application, you are attesting to the fact that you are eligible to vote. So you are telling us that you're eligible to vote. We're not telling you you're eligible to vote. You're telling us. You're in charge. The voters are in charge. So when you tell us you're eligible to vote, we believe you. We're not, that's how that system works. Now,
Right.
there are screenings and checks that go on behind the scenes, but the default mode is that we believe you. You're going to get a voter registration. Matter of fact, you're going to get a card. Even if we figure out later that you were, there'll be a delay, and then there'll be that there's due process that you're entitled to before you lose your right to vote. So the first thing that's going to happen is that you're going to get a card. You're going to get a card. That card does not mean that you're eligible to vote. That card means you told us you're eligible to vote. If we
How
were
does
to
how does
find
the
out
person
after we change. Yep.
how does the person, I'm hypothetically, I've had a felon. I've served my time. I've paid my fines. I completed probation, but I'm not sure. I'm just not sure. What does he or she do before they sign the paper saying they're eligible, what do they do to make sure they're eligible?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, if you live here in Broward County, I could tell you for sure that you can go to we have an excellent public defender in Gordon Weeks, and he has a program to help people decide and determine whether or not their right to vote has in fact been restored. So you have an excellent resource in your public defender's office if you live here in Broward County. Otherwise, really you would need to consult with an attorney. You probably need to go to back to the court where you were actually convicted, and go to that clerk's office and see if they have if they have you owing any fines or fees. You probably need to take a look at your sentencing document and see what's on there. Make sure that whatever, if you were ordered to pay restitution, that actually took place, that you actually completed that. So there's a few different things. I get that it's not an easy process, but that is part of the voter's responsibility is to know their status and know if they've completed all the terms of their sentence.
And wrap up, I remember when this happened in 2018, there were somewhere upwards of 600,000 people that were impacted by this. So it's a significant number of people that, despite the efforts to complicate that status, and there was, I think it went all the way up to the Supreme Court on people's interpretation of the rule and what had to be done before you were eligible. But that has already been sorted out. So I really encourage people, even if you've spent time, to check. Gordon Weeks, as our supervisor, Mr. Scott, indicated, is there a public defender, has a process in his office so you can verify, give him your name, whatever directory information you need to make sure and exercise that right. The only way you're going to be able to become a full citizen is participate in that process. What's the next major change in the law?
So, a lot of it really does go around our vote by mail. And one thing now with vote by mail is that all of our drop boxes that we have, there's a lot of limitations on when those drop boxes can be available to the public, and the drop boxes have to be staffed. And they put some pretty draconian measures in place to make sure that, it's not just a matter of us hiring somebody to sit by that box. The person needs to take breaks and go to lunch and things like that. We've gotten to a point now where we basically put up a tent around every drop box, and we have 3 people assigned at all times. So it's really a significant drain of resources for us as an office anytime we want to have these drop boxes available. We do make it possible for people to mail back their ballots, to send it back to us through the mail by making the postage paid here in Broward County, which every county doesn't do that, but we do that here in Broward. But the one problem we have here in the state of Florida is that you have to actually get your vote by mail ballot, has to arrive at the supervisor of elections office by 7 p.m. on election night, which is different from how it is in other states where there might be a postmark deadline where you can take it to the post office. That's not the case here. Putting it in the mail on election day does not mean your vote will count. If you wait too late, you need to take that ballot and drop it in a drop box. So they've changed the rules to make it harder and make it more resource intensive for counties to provide drop boxes so that those people who want to vote by mail end up getting caught. And some of those vote by mail ballots don't get counted, or they just don't make it back in time. They don't get counted. That's part of the goal of how they changed the law. But we have really pushed back against that here in Broward County because we have most of the funding for my office comes from the county commission, and our county commissioners have been fantastic in the fact that they want to make sure we have that ability. So we've set up, we've committed the resources we need to commit to make sure that when you get down to those last couple of days, this year we'll have 8 different locations that you can go and drop off your vote by mail ballot the last couple of days. Now, if you go during early voting, we'll have somewhere close to 30 different locations that you'll be able to go to, but that stops a couple days before election day. So, it just really gets important as we get close. One of the things that you'll probably hear a lot about this year is this emphasis on voting early. And I actually think that we'll see this from both parties, whereas it wasn't that way in the past, This year, it looks like we'll see this from both parties, um, you know, pushing people to vote early, which means either go vote in person early or drop off your vote by mail as early as possible. As soon as you get it back to us as early as you can. Don't wait until the last day. Don't wait until the last minute. Your options really shrink down as you get closer to that last day. And once you get to that last day, it gets pretty difficult for anybody who waits until the last day to vote.
Let me ask you a couple of questions because I think this is critically important as all the other points you've been making. We have 8 locations. How does one find out where those 8 locations are for drop-off?
Yep, so it's browardvotes.gov, and it's our 8 office locations that we have. So we do have that on our website where our office locations are. Now, the important thing is that's really important for the last 2 days, which is almost something that at least early in the game like we are now, I don't even want to talk about that. We're not waiting until the last 2 days to vote. But It is important that when we do get down to those last 2 days that we have multiple locations, because in the past, or the way these new laws were made, you really could only have drop boxes available at an office location. So if I say we're moving into a new building, we might just have the one office for this whole county of 2 million people to have one office that everybody has to go to that day. You cannot take your vote by mail ballot to your polling place. That's not allowed in the state of Florida. No in particular reason why. We absolutely could collect them there. We'd have them by 7 p.m., bring them back to the office and process them, but state law doesn't allow it. It's just one of those things here in Florida.
So you have I'm sorry, on that point, I apologize for interrupting you, but the point you just said, if you have you've requested a ballot, you've picked up a ballot, I have a ballot in my possession, I've not returned it, can I go and vote and tear up the mail-in ballot?
For sure. Yeah. So you do have that option. You can actually go vote in person. So, one thing I encourage people to go ahead and request the vote by mail ballot is because it doesn't limit your options. It's not as if you have to vote by mail. It actually expands your options. Because if you don't request a vote by mail ballot, then that option is off the table and you have to vote in person. So if it gets down to the wire and you need to vote by mail and maybe have a family member or somebody else go drop it off for you, maybe because you're sick, maybe you're caught up with work or some kind of project at work and you just don't have time to go to the polling place, you can fill out your vote by mail ballot. You can give it to a relative or a friend to take it and drop off for you. So you have that additional option if you make that request. So everybody should just go ahead and go to browardvotes.gov or your county's supervisor of elections website and request your vote by mail ballot. Have that vote by mail ballot coming in the mail and ready for you to use if you want to use it. And if you choose to go vote in person, you can do that instead.
Are they still allowing in the early voting phase? Is Sunday still a day up until the 2 days before the election? Is Sunday still a day where early voting is available?
Yeah, so that's a county by county thing. In Broward County, we will absolutely have voting on Sundays. The Sunday before the election, and then a Sunday a week before that as well.
Yeah, as you know, in the Black community, particularly Black churches, have a very viable souls to the polls, where it's always a big push. And I know under Governor Scott, he for a minute tried to tinker with that, saying let's stop it for obvious reasons.
Yes.
But this is still available. Souls to the polls on Sunday, 2 weeks out, and Sunday the week out of the election day.
And that's what's interesting is that being in this role, I had an opportunity to see some of the draft bills that they were proposing in Tallahassee. And that is still something that to this day, there were 2 things that were just these zombie ideas that they kept coming up. One is that they want to make it so that every county can only have like one Dropbox location, which is just insane. Because if you think about how the counties work in Florida, at first people think that sounds fair. Like, oh, it's the same for everybody. Everybody gets one. But there's a huge, huge difference between counties like Broward, Miami, and Palm Beach that have, over 1, 2, 3 million people, right? And then you take some of these counties that just have a few less than 10,000.
Yeah, 10,000 folks.
Yeah, basically, they have more cows than humans in some of these counties.
Exactly.
To say that we're all the same, we're not all the same. There's a huge difference. So that's one. The other thing was this getting rid of Sunday voting, of saying we can't vote on Sundays. So these things kept coming up. And I think, and the funny thing about the legislative process in Tallahassee and how they operate is that some of these bills that they passed, what they ended up passing was enough that you would have gone crazy and been ready to jump up and down and yell about it. But the first version of the bill was a lot worse. It was a lot worse. So it's almost like you're almost like looking at this thing and you're like, oh my gosh, are they really trying to do all of this? And then they get it, and then you're just like, oof, all right, this is not as bad as it was, as bad as it was going to be. But then you realize it's still pretty bad. It's like they, and I feel like it's just part of the game that gets played in Tallahassee, that they know, we'll get these people up in arms. They'll start hollering about this, that, and the other. We'll take that stuff off, stuff they probably never intended to pass to begin with. And then they through all these other bad things that we, and call that a compromise at the end of the day. So it's been interesting.
Yeah. So we've talked about the improvement in the security of the vote by mail process. We've talked about the various election drop-off boxes, vote by mail, where you can drop it off, where, in the times of getting it in, it's critical. And I'll repeat, it must be in by 7:00 p.m. on the date of the election at the latest. If you get it at 7:01, I've been through that process. They're literally looking at the numbers. If you're not at or before 7 p.m., it will not be counted. So do not take the chance of going up to the deadline. It's important enough for you to get it in advance. So far, we've built up. If you go order your vote by mail ballot, fill it out. And in Broward County, the county is already paying for postage. So all you have to do is fill it out, put it in the proper envelope, and mail it back. You don't even have to pay postage. It's already been paid. So, and that's unique to Broward, and that's unique to Supervisor Scott and his efforts with the county, making sure they're facilitating every vote counts. So that's great, Joe. What's the third major change in the voting laws this year in Florida?
One big change I think people will see is the way voter registration is done. And this has been a slow moving thing that's happened over a long period of time. Whereas I remember back in the day, and I was actually, so I'm a, member of the great Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. And when I was online, one of our service projects was to go out and do a voter registration drive. And back then, it was a few years ago when I did this. It was very easy to go out and do a voter registration drive. And a lot of community groups would do this. And what's also important to say, like in schools, we do these high school voter registration drives, and the schools would have these really robust efforts to collect these voter registration forms and get people registered to vote. The state of Florida has made it virtually impossible now for independent groups to go out and do voter registration drives. And they tighten the screws a little bit more with these three laws. Every year they've made it a little bit harder. So one thing we've done here in Broward County, and we've adjusted to this stuff. So like I said, with the drop boxes, we opened up these offices to have extra drop boxes, and we bought tents, and we got people. We're doing whatever we have to do. And when it comes to voter registration, it's the same thing. So we now have our voter registration forms that we provide as a handout that our office gives out that allows people to send it in. For one thing, you can do it online, right? So we encourage people to use our online voter registration system. You can register to vote at your DMV. That's how most people get registered anyway. But if you need to do it on paper and you need to mail it in to us, which is really what needs to happen, because you're just not having these community groups doing voter registration drives anymore. They can't collect the forms. People have to get the form back to us themselves. We're providing the form in a format where you can fold it, seal it. You don't need an envelope or a stamp. You can close that form, fill it out, seal it up, drop it in the mail. It comes back to my office. So we've got it all set up. We're giving it out to all the different community groups that are out there trying to help get people registered to vote. and basically they're, we're making it as easy as we possibly can in a state that is doing everything to make it as hard as possible for people to register to vote. But ultimately, I think that, we're really turning a negative into a positive with this one, especially on the voter registration side. And hopefully getting more people to actually use these forms. Because it's really not just about getting registered to begin with. It's also important to update your information, update your
Right.
contact information, especially your address, because that's how people end up getting removed from the rolls, is when they move and they don't update their address. So that's, we're helping help facilitate and make that happen.
Well, that's an excellent 2 points you just made. Number one, if you've moved since the last election, you need to make sure your correct address is on file. How can an organization for that matter, or an individual that wants to go and assist in getting people to register, where do they get the registration forms that you were mentioning? Is just sign, close, fold, close, and put in the mailbox? Where do they get those forms from?
So they should reach out to my office, reach out to us, our outreach department. The email is outreach@browardvotes.gov. Now, of course, this is only going to be applicable to Broward County. I believe we're the only county doing this right now. I hope some of my colleagues in the other counties pick up on this and start doing it. But yeah, outreach@browardvotes.gov would be the email address to reach out to. We'll get you added to our neighborhood partnership meetings. We have quarterly meetings where we meet with groups that are out there working to get people to the polls, working to get people registered. So all these groups that are active in the community doing this kind of work, we have quarterly meetings where we give them updates and we just talk about different things that they need to know to be prepared for the upcoming election.
And is that where they get you give out the forms there?
Yep. Or you could just come to our office and we'll give them to you at our office as well.
And your office is out in Lauderhill?
The Lauderhill Mall is probably the most convenient for most folks because it's close to the turnpike. We're also in downtown Fort Lauderdale at the Broward County Governmental Center.
Right on Andrews.
Right. We have a new building. We're moving into a new building this summer, which we're all very excited about. That's going to be right off of Commercial Boulevard, just west of I-95, close to Chase Stadium. So we are excited about that move as well. So we're eventually going to be in new digs here very soon.
Oh, that's awesome. Are you going to keep the Lauderhill office?
Through the end of this year, we'll be in the Lauderhill office till the end of this year.
Okay.
To make sure we're there for the elections this year. And then we're going to have to find some new arrangements. We'll have to, I'm hoping we'll find another location to use right there in Lauderhill in one of the government buildings.
So voter registration obviously is limited, and independent organizations, they need to get engaged with getting the election forms from your office, or going to outreach at browardvotes.com and coming to the meetings that y'all are holding on a quarterly basis to keep them up to speed on what's important in your efforts to get people to vote.
Yes. So keep in mind, it is harder to register and easier to get removed. There's so many things that we could probably turn this into a 4-hour podcast talking about everything. But, just to slip in a fourth one, they made it a lot easier, a lot more efficient in terms of how our list maintenance process works and getting people and removing people from the rolls. The way the state does that now is a lot more efficient than it was before. And the net result is simply that we've actually seen the voter roll shrink significantly in Broward County as a result of that.
Yeah, I just highlight for those listeners and for the listeners to speak to others. Think about what we're talking about. We're talking about processes that have been intentionally put in place to suppress the vote. Why is it that they want to make it more difficult for a person to vote? They don't want your vote to count. For that reason, and that reason alone, is enough for you to do everything to make sure your vote counts. Otherwise, you're falling right within their plan. With the cries of 2020 of a fake election, which was disproved by 62 or 63 courts, many of them from Republican judges, Democratic judges, independent judges. Nobody found the fraud that was being cried by the wolf, that there was election fraud. but yet and still across this country, we had so many states make significant changes to the electoral process, and they tried to make it less convenient. Making it difficult to have drop boxes. That was a convenience, and not just minority communities. All communities benefited from that. The early voting. That Republicans didn't want to do it because their leader said don't do it, even though he did it. So now this year you're going to have, I think, both parties utilizing that apparatus. But I just want people to recognize your vote is so valuable and important. That's why they're trying to disrupt it. That's why they're trying to make it difficult. And for that reason alone, we as a community of Broward County residents need to make sure we get out to vote and encourage people to vote, because these laws are trying to make it the opposite, less participation. And if it's less participation, then those in power have greater power. Let your voice be heard. Let me ask you a few more questions, Joe. We still have, and I'm trying to think, we have on the ballot, we're going to have on the ballot, not just in November, not just, let me back up. August is the first election. And
Yes.
August elections will be where all our judges are going to be on the ballot. Anybody who's in a primary is going to be on the ballot. The presidential race will be in November, because there's not going to be a competition on the Republican side or on the Democratic side. So those are just roll over to November. But anybody that's facing a primary fight, those are going to be in August. Am I correct?
That is correct. So our partisan primaries, which at Florida is a closed primary state. So if you want to participate in those partisan primaries, then you actually have to be registered with that party, and you have to be registered with that party 29 days before the election. So don't delay if you want to participate. And I'll tell you, for a lot of our, especially for the legislative seats, as well as our county commission seats, those races are pretty decisive on the primary here in Broward County. So I encourage people to at least be aware of that, because they might be disappointed to find when they come to November that in some of these cases, these races are already over and they really were decided in August. We may end up having what we have universal primary contests, right? Where even though where it doesn't even go on to November, because all of there was only one party in it to begin with. So once the August race is over, it's done. Right. Some of the school board races will be that way too. If somebody gets more than 50% of the vote in August, it doesn't go on to November. So judicial races, same way. So August is incredibly important. A lot of these positions are decided in August.
And, there's so much media coverage about the presidency race. The local races are critically important to our day-to-day. Who's going to guide the education policy and governance for our school boards? Who are your judges? Who are your county commissioners in some of the cities? It's a lot of elections on the local level that you got to participate in, because that hits you more frequently than the national elections. So don't just wait for the presidential elections. Get engaged in August. And this year it'll be August. What's the date?
August 20th.
August 20th.
Well, that's the last day. That's the day you've already voted before then. We hope.
Right.
That's what we're trying to encourage. We're trying to encourage folks to get out before. That's the last day to vote is August 20th.
And if I've signed up for a ballot, a mail-in ballot, do they send out that August mail-in ballot and then they send out the November mail-in ballot?
Correct. So you'll get them both. If you sign up now for your vote by mail, or if you've already signed up this cycle, then you'll get both of those ballots.
And that's what we should really be pushing. Vote by mail. And I'll tell you a reason why. And this is Gene Pettis. This has nothing to do with you, Supervisor Scott. I'm concerned. I'm concerned of intimidation factors on the day of the elections. I'm concerned about the craziness in our society and somebody coming out there in an open carry, manner and intimidating people and scaring them from the lines, scaring them, older people, and doing things that's going to disrupt the process. Now, I hope I'm wrong, but one thing that I know for sure is the way to avoid that risk, however real or minor it may be, is to vote by mail, and you don't have to go out there and deal with the potential disruptive behavior of those that don't want your vote to count. So that's why it's being highly recommended. Vote early, vote by mail, and make sure your vote is in well before the cutoff date. And make that's the way you make sure your vote counts. That raised another point, Joe. I remember in Atlanta 4 years ago, when in the 2020, you saw elderly people, you saw people out there in long lines. So somehow the lines in the minority community is always longer because they have they're fewer precincts, fewer booths available many times, and the lines get longer. In Atlanta, I know it did. And you got elderly people who had to sit down. And I know in Georgia, they came up with, you can't even have a lawn chair. You can't have somebody coming around giving water. That's like crazy stuff. Like, why should that be prohibited if it's helping the person exercise their constitutional right? It's obvious. Anything to disrupt certain communities participating. In Broward County, are there any of those type of things that we need to worry about if people want to vote on the day of? Is there anything? Can they bring their lawn chairs? Can somebody be out there passing water in the heat of Broward County in November?
So we do have a 150-foot boundary around the building where you're not allowed to do any kind of solicitation. So, so there is a rule in place, and people are not going to be able to walk up and down the line and give you a bottle of water or anything like that. That is state law within 150 feet of the door. If you're beyond that, which I'll tell you, my intention is not to see those long lines here. We do everything we can to prevent that. And we do have good, significant resources compared to other parts of Florida. So
that's awesome.
It's not the same situation you would see in Atlanta here in Broward County.
Right.
But one thing I think is important when we do talk about the early voting is it's not just mail. There's also in person. For people who like to vote in person, voting in person does not mean waiting until the last day. If you vote in person during the 2-week period, there'll be a 2-week period that we have early voting sites. You can go to any early voting site in the county. And the reason that's important is that most people don't work close to where they live. And, the election, the last day is a Tuesday, which most people are at work. Then after work, you got to go pick up the kids. Then you got to try to get there by 7 o'clock, and you might not make it. But if you go during in-person early voting, you can go to a place that's close to your job. You can go on your lunch break. You can go after work before you pick up the kids, because you're not commuting back to where you live before you vote. On the last day, you have to. You have one choice, and that's to go vote in person at your neighborhood polling place, which is close to your house. That's the only place.
And it closes at what time?
It closes at 7 o'clock. So that's statewide, that's state law to close that down at 7 o'clock. So the early voting sites give you that opportunity to vote somewhere else. Let's say that you have somebody in your family or friend who is dependent on you to pick them up and take them to go vote. If that person doesn't live in the same community you live in, they may have a different place to vote on election day. You take that person, you go to an early voting site. As long as you guys are both residents of the same county, you can go to the same early voting site and vote together. So there's so many advantages to voting early. It's like if people just really understood how much better it is to vote early, whether you do it by mail or in person, vote early, because it just gives you all these options. And honestly, some people say, well, if you can do that early, how come you can't do it on election day? State law, that's all it is. And it's to make things difficult. And these people, they say it out loud. They want to make it difficult. They want to trip people up. And we could absolutely do this all the way up to the last day if state law allowed it. State law doesn't allow it. That's the only reason. You can't drop off your ballot at a polling place on election day because state law doesn't allow it. Some places some other states it's different, but in Florida, we're dealing with the laws that we have here in the state of Florida.
And you've done an excellent job of explaining, and I've heard you prior to today explaining to our residents. And I'm just repeating it for emphasis purposes. When we're talking about early voting, there are two ways. One, by mail-in ballot. Two, by the 2-week early voting period. The 2-week early voting period, you can vote at any precinct. It doesn't have to be your home assigned precinct, any precinct during that 2-week period, which is a lot more flexible than day of voting, which you must go to your precinct. You can't vote any other place. So it's really, really important, audience, that you communicate these strategies to people within your circle, because we can't let our vote be invalidated or disenfranchised because we didn't understand the rules of the game. Supervisor Scott is telling us in clear words, vote early, vote by a pre-postage ballot, get it in early. If you want to wait till the 2 weeks before the elections, that what we call early voting period in person, do it there, any precinct that you want to go to. They accept as long as you have identification and you have a registration card, you can vote. Otherwise, on the day of, you have until early morning hours to 7 o'clock to get in and get the vote in. But under whatever circumstance, do not allow them making it more difficult to disenfranchise you. This is too important. Our quality of life is on the line. Your children's quality of life is on the line, and too many people have died to give us the right to vote, for us to be apathetic about this process. We should be over the moon in energy because of how important this election is. And too often, and I'll end my narrative and go to the next question, but too often people wait to after the election to say, oh man, how did that person get in? The first question I ask is, did you participate? And so often they didn't. They didn't participate. And we got a history of very few people electing not to participate, and it gets us to where we are today. To make your vote count and to have an impact, you must participate. So don't complain afterwards. Get active before and have an impact on the outcome, not just complaining after the election. If you have any questions, Supervisor Scott has indicated the website, and it's a website with a lot of frequently asked questions on the website. Answers to the questions that have been asked and asked by many residents. It's www.broward, that's BROWARD votes, VOTES.gov. Go there and you have a resource to answer virtually every question that could be thought of. They've done a great job on that website. In addition to the elections, we're going to have some amendments on the ballot as well. Am I correct?
Yes, 6 constitutional amendments, which is another one that you really don't want to sleep on. That's the governing document for the state of Florida. You know, this has to do with their individual rights. It provides the government with their limits on what governments can do in terms of passing laws. So these constitutional amendments are incredibly important. I would encourage everybody to, you know, don't let that ballot fatigue set in. Sometimes the ballot is very long. There's a lot of stuff on there, and we just vote for a couple of races near the top and then stop. We really can't let that happen this year. We need folks to vote everything that's on that ballot. Take your time. It's another reason it'll be important to vote early, vote by mail, is because if you do that at home, you can sit at your kitchen table and take your time. You can look things up. You can discuss it with family and friends. whatever, it gives you that opportunity. So knowing that there's 6 constitutional amendments on the ballot this year for you to consider, I would definitely encourage folks to just plan ahead and be prepared for that.
And that's a critical point. Every election, because people know I'm a lawyer, when it gets to the amendments, lawyers put those amendments together, and they try to put the amendments together sometime to make it difficult to understand. And so it's important that you do exactly what Supervisor Scott said, is get your ballot. Sometime there is available on it's available on the website that I just stated, and study it, so that when you go there, you could take your piece of paper there and write that, write what your vote is for these amendments. Let me run through them really quickly. Amendment 1: partisan school board members would make district school board elections partisan starting in 2026. That's what we need, more partisan fights. Amendment 2: right to hunt and fish. Amendment 2 establishes state constitutional right to hunt and fish. If approved, Florida would join around 24 other states that already have the right in place. Georgia and Alabama are the other 2. Amendment 3: recreational marijuana. Amendment 3 legalizes recreational marijuana in the state of Florida, 21 years and older, to have up to 3 ounces and up to 5 grams of cannabis concentrate. Amendment 4: abortion access. Amendment 4 guarantees abortion access in Florida. Amendment 5: property taxes could give homeowners more savings on their property taxes by adjusting one of the state's homestead exemptions for inflation. And lastly, Amendment 6 is campaign funding. Amendment 6 attempts to repeal campaign financing, which in 22 was $12 million went to candidates running for governor. That's $12 million off of a multi-billion-dollar state budget. I think it's interesting to see where there's fights. There's all sorts of legal fights to keep the abortion one off the ballot. There are all sorts of efforts to keep the marijuana off the ballot. For those that are interested, your voice needs to be heard on whatever side of you want to come down on those, but they're fighting about that for a reason. So if you're interested in any of one of those 6, it's really important for you to get out and let your voice be heard on those changes to our Constitution. As Supervisor Scott stated, it's the governing body of our state and our governmental organizations. So it can't get more critical than that. I'm going to give you the opportunity, Supervisor Joe Scott, to close. I want to thank you. You're not in an easy space. I don't know what could be more difficult than elections in this United States and in the state of Florida. So I commend you for the work that you've done, because it's through your hard work that we can have orderly elections. And Broward County, I think, is an example of giving access to the ballot, as opposed to allowing politics to shrink that citizenry right. So with that, give us your closing wisdom, if you will.
Yeah. So no, this was such a great podcast. You had so many great questions, and there's so much information that is out there for folks who are listening. The one thing I would tell you is that if you want to learn more, if you want to keep informed on everything that's happening related to elections, you should follow us. We're on multiple social media platforms. Our handle is @BrowardVotes, wherever we are posting, which we're using Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have a YouTube channel. So go ahead and follow us @BrowardVotes. Find us and follow us. And that way you will continue to get this good information and know exactly what's going on with elections here in the state of Florida, and specifically what we're doing here in Broward County to counteract the voter suppression efforts coming out of Tallahassee. Thank you again, Gene, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to your audience.
I appreciate you as well, and continue the great work that you're doing for our county as a whole. And good luck. Thanks again for coming on to Can We Talk 360. And thank you to the audience for listening. And hopefully this has inspired you to get excited about exercising your right as a resident of the state of Florida and a resident of Broward County in particular, to make sure that you're getting engaged not only on August 20th, but you're ready to get engaged on November 5th, which is the national election. Both are important, and be prepared to participate in both of those primary and general elections, and encourage others to do so. It's the only way we can have an impact on controlling our own destiny. Otherwise, you allow others to control your life. Thank you so much for tuning in.
The law firm of Halitzer, Pettison Schwam is a proud sponsor of the Can We Talk 360 podcast. Our firm handles medical malpractice, wrongful death, and catastrophic personal injury litigation. We pride ourselves in being advocates for justice on behalf of those who have been seriously injured. For decades, we've taken the lead in making your case our priority. It's who we are. It's who we'll always be. Halitzer, Pettison Schwam. Serious injuries, proven results.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Can We Talk 360. I sincerely hope that you were inspired to seize this moment in time and take real action towards change. Remember, all change begins with a conversation. Be sure to tune in every month for more fascinating discussions and motivational food for the soul. Please share with your friends, family, and colleagues. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Can We Talk 360, and visit us on the web at www.canwetalk360.com.